for more on this, I want to bring in Mackenzie Irwin. She's an employment lawyer, and she's joining us from Toronto. Thanks so much for making time for us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So first of all, can you take us through exactly what this will mean for employees? What will they potentially learn about what their employers are doing?
Yeah, so the whole purpose of this is really about transparency. So in terms of what employers are going to gain, is they're going to gain the knowledge as to whether their employer is monitoring them. And if they are, how they're monitoring them, what data they're collecting, and what they're using that data for. So it's really about transparency in terms of what knowledge, giving the employees the knowledge of what exactly is happening.
And if the employee then thinks the company's monitoring policy is too intrusive, is there any legal recourse available to them?
So this legislation doesn't give them any exact recourse in terms of what they can do, but it doesn't. The existing privacy rights still exist. So it doesn't give employees any new rights, but now the employees will have the knowledge as to what monitoring is going on, and then they can take that knowledge and go, have it reviewed by a lawyer and determine whether or not their rights are actually their privacy rights are being infringed by what their employer is doing.
Is there sort of a balance here? Because as we are moving to this sort of new hybrid form of work, certainly when you are in the office, there is a way, maybe a less intrusive way of monitoring because you're all in the same space together. So was this sort of an inevitable step?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't really a matter of whether, should your employer be monitoring you. That's not what this legislation does. It's really just making that transparency available. So as long as, I think for sure, if the business has a legitimate business purpose for monitoring, in terms of tracking their employees that are at working from home and are no longer in the office every day, and that intrusion is as minimal as possible to really achieve that legitimate business purpose, then for sure, yeah, employers should be able to monitor their employees when they're working remotely.
And so where do you think this goes from here? You know, we were talking about how this is Ontario, whether or not it will be replicated in other provinces. Certainly we know that the entire idea of working from home, et cetera, is evolving. So perhaps changes to come across the country. But where does this go from here? Does it become something that is continually redeveloped or, sort of reintroduced in different forms as those sort of legal conversations happen?
Absolutely. I think this is just the first step. I think in having that transparency and giving employees that knowledge is just one step. Once employees are aware of what monitoring is going on, they're going to be able to determine first, whether they're going to accept that monitoring, whether that electronic monitoring is actually legitimate, and whether it's legal. And then in terms of other provinces, I think for sure, Ontario is the first one to implement this exact kind of policy in legislation, but I think for sure other provinces will be looking to Ontario and seeing what comes of this legislation and hopefully following suit to give employees more, empowering employees with that knowledge across the country.
As an employment lawyer, have you fielded a lot of questions about this, about how much tracking is happening?
So to date, no, certainly not. I think that because while people are working from home, obviously during COVID, there was a big transition to a whole workforce working from home. And so in the background, these employers may have been implementing these electronic monitoring measures without their employees' knowledge. And so this legislation is so important because it's going to actually give employees that knowledge to then determine, okay, do I need to be speaking with a lawyer about this? Is this something that my employer can actually do? And so I think, once this actually gets in the hands of, once this knowledge is in the hands of the employees, they're going to have an understanding of what's actually going on, and they'll be able to go take that information to a lawyer, have it reviewed. If it's in breach of their other privacy rights, then for sure there could be some sort of constructive dismissal case here. And if it doesn't, then it actually kind of gives the employees the opportunity to decide for themselves whether that's something that they want to accept in their employment. But I expect either way, once these policies are distributed to their employees, I expect we're going to see a lot of pushback and I'm going to have a lot more employees and employers coming to me and reviewing these policies and what's actually going on.
Mackenzie, thank you so much for your insight on this. We appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
That was employment lawyer Mackenzie Irwin. She joined us today from Toronto.